In the very first moments of the 21st century, Vladimir Putin became president of Russia. His first words,
идет очень жесткая конкурентная борьба.
We live in a competitive world and we are not among its leaders. And right away, Putin began to change his country. He joined soldiers on the front lines of the war in Chechnya. He reassured Russians that better times were ahead.
I think we'll get paid and we'll have work.
The country quickly fell in love with Vladimir Putin. The #1 song in Russia was called A Man Like Putin.
He's just very, he's beautiful man, you see.
But the biggest surprise? America also loved Vladimir Putin. President George W. Bush thought he'd found a kindred spirit.
I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. I was able to get a sense of his soul.
Even Hollywood fell for the new Russian president. He bonded with stars at a charity dinner. But the honeymoon would soon come to a crashing halt.
He was a KGB agent. By definition, he doesn't have a soul.
Next, when Vladimir met Hillary.
It's important to remember how much he despised Hillary Clinton.
Our unpredictable Chrome syndrome.
can't take it, baby. I can't take it no more.
At the heart of the hacking scandal that rocked the 2016 presidential election
Ladies and gentlemen,
was an old grudge.
my mother, my hero, and our next president, Hillary Clinton.
It went beyond ideology. It was personal. Vladimir Putin was not a fan of Hillary Clinton.
Of course, Putin wanted Hillary Clinton to lose. He hated Hillary Clinton.
Prime Minister, we have a lot of problems.
The tension between the leaders had been brewing for years. In 2001, another American leader, George W. Bush, vouched for Putin.
I was able to get a sense of his soul.
But on the campaign trail in 2008, Hillary had a different take.
I could have told him he was a KGB agent. By definition, he doesn't have a soul. I mean, this is a waste of time, right?
Recently, Mrs. Clinton said that you, as a former KGB agent, by definition, can have no soul.
Putin's reply, statesmen shouldn't be guided by their hearts, they should use their heads. Clinton had a lot of tough words for Putin over the years.
He's a very arrogant person to deal with.
We have to
Had a lot of tough words for Putin.
He is somebody who will take as much as he possibly can.
But it was what happened in 2011 that marked a point of no return. It began with the Arab Spring protests early that year. The kind of popular uprising that Putin dreaded.
He begins to see himself through the eyes of Hosni Mubarak.
Mubarak of Egypt was facing prosecution. Syria's Bashar al-Assad was on the ropes. Libya's strongman Muammar Gaddafi met a particularly gruesome fate. Brutally killed after begging for his life. Putin may have feared the same bloody fate for himself. Just a few weeks later, rebellion arrived in Russia. Tens of thousands rallied in the streets of Moscow. The biggest protest there since the fall of the Soviet Union.
People were hanging off lampposts, people were in the streets. It's really shocking.
Putin was now living the same nightmare he had endured as a KGB officer in East Germany in 1989. This time, in his own backyard. And he wasn't even president at the time. He was prime minister, having handed the presidency over to his associate, Dmitry Medvedev.
As the winter went longer and longer and got colder and colder, the protests got bigger and bigger.
As Putin saw people turning against him, Hillary Clinton weighed in.
The Russian people, like people everywhere, deserve the right to have their voices heard and their votes counted.
When Putin hears something like that, I imagine he hears Bush talking about Saddam Hussein. He hears that as they're coming for me.
Oh, bullshit.
They're trying to drive me from power. What the hell do you know about my people and whether they deserve to have their voices heard? Like, I'll tell you if they should have their voices heard.
Russians had a lot of reasons to be angry.
Владимира Путина на должность президента страны.
let's get one thing perfectly fucking straight. You dumbass, pseudo-centrist CNN morons. But then again, just to interject on myself, not many people know any better than this, do they? People who are making millions of dollars selling books because they were a CIA agent. They don't even seem to be fucking aware of this. The fact is, at no point, ever, not for a second, not for a millisecond, not for an atomically dissected fairy fart, okay? That's smaller than a millisecond, just so you know. Not for an instant did Putin think that anybody was coming for him militarily. The thought never even crossed his mind, just as it has not crossed any world Western leader's mind until this channel was made. It was not until 2015 that any Western leader considered regime change or possibility of war with Russia. This entire precursory context that CNN has helped brainwash the public with is foundational knowledge required for adhering to Russian propaganda. You see, without this whole idea that Putin felt threatened, none of this other bullshit has a hope of making sense. Oh, I forgot it was live.
Social media is the way to touch Americans personally. 13 Russians have been indicted by Special Counsel Robert Mueller in connection to the operation. And elite hackers linked to Russian intelligence pillaged the emails of the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign, releasing embarrassing information with devastating results.
WikiLeaks has released a new batch of
Another round of stolen emails. The Clinton campaign knows this could be a tough.
This latest leak, pretty much a Trump dream come true.
Donald Trump was delighted by Clinton's misfortunes.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Donald J. Trump will become the 45th president of the United States, defeating.
In the end, America's election went Putin's way.
I've just received a call from Secretary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton was quite negative about our country and her attitude.
It wouldn't be bad to get along with Russia, right? It wouldn't be bad.
And to the contrary, the other candidate, Donald Trump, was saying that we have to find some understanding.
But people like me, I like them. Even Putin.
Whom would you like better?
This is not the outcome we wanted.
Hillary Clinton suffered one of the most shocking defeats in American history.
I know how disappointed you feel because I feel it too.
At least in part because of the alleged hacking operation.
This is painful, and it will be for a long time.
Putin had apparently avenged his old grudge.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
And he may have achieved even more.
The 45th President of the United States.
If Donald Trump is in some way compromised, if the Russian government has something that it feels has on him in terms of leverage, that's a very serious thing. I don't suggest for a second that I have the answer to this question, but we can't just let this matter drop.
Up next,
A prominent Russian opposition figure has been shot and killed in...
Over the shots, hit him in the back.
Lost in the Kremlin.
The story Vladimir Putin might want the world to forget.
Well, isn't that fucking special? So, in a nutshell, before I start getting to John Kerry about a statement here that I want to make, and going into interjection after interjection like I tend to do, you know, us pesky smart people. Let me just say this. Without addressing on a constant basis, as centrists, as Democrats, the fact that Russian propaganda and the Russian interference in 2016 in particular was geared towards far left and far right groups, we won't ever whittle away at that whole Donald Trump's base thing. You see, to make them see clearly who's bullshitting them, they have to be made to see clearly who's bullshitting them. And until you have a balanced approach to the truth, you're still bullshitting them. You may mean well. You may think that you're fighting for justice. You may think that you're the only hope for some little babies' lives who've been fucking separated from their families. But you are doing those children a disservice by playing right into Putin's hands and sticking to one side of the argument. Now this comes typically in the form of us now focusing on the alt-right, focusing on the fascism, focusing on the fact that we have a Führer now. I mean, he practically plays king, appointing his family to fucking advise him. I mean, come on, man. But at the same time, we are failing, moment after moment, to find teachability in circumstance. You see, it should be known by now. It should be a daily part of the conversation that the KGB long-term plan includes instigation on both extreme sides. It should be known by now. It should be a point of daily conversation that rational thought is innately centrist. Okay, and that's not pseudo-intellectualism as you find on the left, and that's not pseudo-spiritualism as you find on the right. That is a blending of both ideals and the understanding of what religious persecution and freedom of thought actually are, and how to maintain a balance between these things. You see, I'm extremely disappointed in people like David Pakman, for instance. Extremely disappointed. You see, he made a tweet asking about whether or not he should allow a psychic to respond to his character assassination of religious people. Okay? Now, still think he's got a good heart. But the fact of the matter is, his character assassination of religious people, en masse, is a violation of constitutional norms. It is not how Americans are supposed to act. It's not how people are supposed to be accused. You see, what David Pakman is doing is no better than what Hitler did to the Jews, or what the Russians did to Crimea in East Ukraine. It's singling out a group and propagandizing your following against them. And it's dangerous. And anybody who thinks that religious persecution is somehow okay, whereas interreligious persecution is not, because it alone leads to deaths, needs to look up a little thing called the fucking Soviet Union.
There is nothing to comment on. Over the course of Putin's time in power, his regime has been accused of involvement in the deaths of many of its critics, including the journalist Anna Politkovskaya and the former KGB agent Alexander Litvinenko. Some Russia experts say there are dozens more like them. And then there are those who live to tell. The man seen in this surveillance footage at a UK convenience store is Sergei Skripal, an ex-Russian spy. He moved here to Salisbury, England, 8 years ago, after being released from prison in Moscow, where he was convicted of selling secrets to Britain's MI6. In March, Skripal and his daughter Yulia were found unconscious on a shopping center bench in Salisbury. Police concluded that the pair had been poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent, and while both managed to survive, UK authorities placed the blame squarely on one person.
It is tragic that President Putin has chosen to act in this way.
Putin shot back, calling the accusations complete drivel and rubbish. Pro-Kremlin TV went even further, blaming the former double agent himself.
Профессия предателя вообще одна из самых опасных в мире.
Back to that night on the Bolshoi-Moscow-Bretsky Bridge.
Тут господин Путин сказал!
The allegations that Putin might have played a role in Boris Nemtsov's murder may stem in part from the evidence that Nemtsov had been accumulating against President Putin.
Nemtsov was about to reveal information that would prove Russia's involvement in the conflict in Ukraine.
Indeed he was.
That Ukraine
I remember that
report
shit
was
in real
released
time.
a few months after Nemtsov's murder. But there was an earlier Nemtsov report published in 2012 that also was embarrassing for Putin. It claimed the president had 43 planes, 15 helicopters, and 4 yachts at his disposal, including one super yacht.
Man, that must have been a long time ago.
There are the palaces. Nemtsov's report says there were 20 presidential palaces
he's got 3 more
available
now.
to Putin at any time. One of the palaces, known in the press simply as Putin's Palace, was said to be worth $1 billion.
This is not true. This is actually a perverted commenting of reality.
Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, says every world leader...
You know how you can tell if that guy's lying?
...nuclear power like Russia or the United States...
His lips move.
...state-owned homes and planes and helicopters...
Third giveaway.
...that are safe and have secure communications.
Of course, he uses these vehicles, this plane, these residences, but it's not his property. The rumors about his wealth, the rumors about the palaces, has nothing to do with reality. It's just lies.
Yeah, those properties belong to companies, and those companies belong to Putin. That's different.
And some people, including myself, believe that he's the richest man in the world, or one of the richest men in the world.
Bill Browder was once the largest foreign investor in Russia. Now he's one of Vladimir Putin's toughest critics. We talked in
I don't think Bill Browder even has a clue how rich Putin is.
The richest man in the world. I really think that. And I'm not just saying that crazily.
Can you estimate his net worth?
200 billion.
Really?
I believe that it's 200 billion.
That would make Putin wealthier than the man whom Forbes says is the world's wealthiest, Jeff Bezos.
All these rumors, all these accusations about billions and billions of dollars as his fortune, this is not true. Don't believe in them. He's got nothing. He's got what he writes in his personal financial declaration every year.
Putin's most recent financial declaration says that he personally owns less than half an acre of land, a roughly 900 square foot apartment, and a 200 square foot garage, into which maybe he puts the vehicles listed in that document. 2 vintage Russian sedans, a Russian 4x4, and a trailer like this one. The document does not say how much Putin has in the bank or in investments. Former top U.S. Treasury official Adam Zubin talked to the BBC.
I'm not in a position to give you figures, but what I can say is that he supposedly draws a state salary of something like $110,000 a year. That is not an accurate statement of the man's wealth.
We may not know exactly how much Putin is worth, but we do know this. Vladimir Putin is remarkably popular in Russia. Why? We'll tell you when we come back.
Wow, the glum faces. Gay marriage will be an issue in the election campaigns ahead. The taxpayers were handing money over to the bankers.
What Bush did was prevent the Second Great Depression.
He says there's going to be a surge of troops in Iraq.
The surge proved remarkably effective.
New Orleans essentially been swept off the map. Person after person saying, where is the federal government?
The Bush administration was asleep at the switch.
Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job.
The 2000s, Sunday at 9 on CNN.
Hi, Yankee Curtis. I'm Sean Hayes, executive producer of The History of Comedy.
No key card, no entry, sir.
You know, I'm gonna call Anderson. Can hold up for 1 second here. Would it help if I knew Chris Cuomo?
I have a delivery for Dr. Butte.
No, Mr. Hayes.
History of Comedy, Sundays at 10 on CNN.
I think I heard it. It worked.
I'm lucky to get through shit without a disaster.
Okay, I'm supposed to fucking mute the commercials, but that was pretty funny. This guy is in me, yes, fuck. I know what's up, that's for sure. To the point of it being a curse. Now, forgive me for just assuming that you're not being genuine. Because it's usually rather difficult for people to find this channel. In fact, lately it's been rather difficult for me to even send and receive messages from people I regularly communicate with. That is, as you say, what's up. But anyways, if you've seen my post on Twitter, and that's how you found this channel, you should have no trouble locating my Patreon link. But as for usual practices, I don't really ask new people to contribute anything. I really want people to just come here to learn what they can so that it can be of immediate use. And, you know, I have some very long-time viewers who help me pay the bills. But other than that, the only thing I'm interested in right now is getting a business off the ground that will enable me to not have to rely on politicians or rulers or anything else to ensure the survivability of humankind. Don't call me your master, man. I don't sign your fucking paychecks. Uh-huh. You know, your spirit energy reminds me of that little chemical trail of slug leaves. Very good. Anyways.
86% in recent years. Consider that American presidents are happy when they break the 50% mark. How has he done it? Partly, it's the cult of Putin. He has mastered the art of the manly photo op. He rides horseback bare-chested, finds ancient treasures underwater. He rides a submarine to the bottom of the Black Sea, flies planes, fights forest fires.
There's something ridiculous about a middle-aged world leader riding around shirtless on a horse like Conan the Barbarian after a dozen donuts. Who thinks this looks good?
Everything that we find ridiculous about Vladimir Putin is very appealing in a media universe that he controls absolutely.
Perhaps the foundation of the Putin juggernaut is a political truism no matter where you live. It's the economy, stupid. After the chaotic years of Boris Yeltsin, Putin stepped in and stabilized the country. And he rode the wave of ever-rising oil prices, which in Russia's resource-rich economy translated into rising wages and soaring stock indices. Then, in late 2014, the party stopped. Oil prices slumped, and soon after came Western economic sanctions. Vladimir Putin has navigated hard times well. He has slashed social spending, implemented an austerity program, allowed the ruble to fall, and his central bank has kept inflation in check. Putin is a fiscal conservative.
The outward-seeming aspect of wealth looks closer to Dubai than it does to Moscow 30 years ago. It's just an amazing transformation.
Add to the economics Putin's secret sauce, nationalism. And it surged in 2014 after an invasion that shocked the world.
Bigger nations must not be allowed to bully the small.
Vladimir Putin grabbed a piece of Ukraine for Russia. The West was horrified.
That's the sort of thing that Adolf Hitler did in the 1930s. We thought those days were gone.
But it all looked very different through Russian eyes.
I have never met a Russian who accepted the notion of Ukraine as a totally separate state.
Of course, many Ukrainians deeply resented the invasion. But not Russians. They see it as the revival of a deep sense of power and national destiny.
Putin has given them their pride back. Russia is once again a great power.
Putinism is an ideology of social conservatism, of anti-Westernism, but above all, of national power. Putin might say, he has made Russia great again. Sound familiar?
We will make America great again!
Like Putin, Trump has used nationalism to boost his support. But many believe that Donald Trump is no Vladimir Putin.
Putin is a much more practiced, subtle, cunning player. He's playing, in poker terms, a couple of deuces at the highest level. He's reasserted Russia on the world stage from a position of relative weakness like nobody I can think of. That's an amazing feat of geopolitics.
This is not a bet. It's a high-tech revolution in sleep.
Yep. Got a pretty high IQ for somebody with short man complex. Oh. So anyways, the Trumpist base needs to be reminded that the entirety of the generational paranoia of liberalism that is now the pivot point for all right-wing spin was initially the result of communist influence on what was deemed to be the hippie movement at the time. And then later in the 1990s, began seen as general whoredom. In fact, it basically progressed that way from the 70s to the 90s. This came in the form of everything from religion-mocking comedians to scantily clad pop singers. All of these people had producers and backers and agents and just a lot of good friends in the business, in the industry, in the know, on the inside, as it were. And it almost seemed like you had to be connected or something. Like it wasn't a result of talent. It was more of a result of a mysterious unifying thread. There was something about these people. All members of families, all friends of each other, all connected in some way. Must just be some little clique. Because you know how it's so easy to have that many people engage in a conspiracy without them being drilled from a fucking childbirth. Well, you see, in fact, they were engaged in a conspiracy. And what they were from childbirth were agents of influence. And you don't need to be a specific knowledgeable agent of influence to be blessed by them necessarily. All you have to do is fall in line with their standard of stifling religion and spreading whoredom. That is the unifying factor that suggests participation on the part of American infiltrators, the American propagandized, and the powers that control the Kremlin itself, as being members of a cult. The reason why the Vatican has recently sought to increase its number of exorcists is because this army of Satanists is on the rise. This group that acts like demons. And if there ever was a group that you could say was doing the bidding of demons, in fact, to the point where a rational person who has convinced themselves that demons don't exist should take into account the strategic sum of their actions and maybe reconsider the possibility. Because humans aren't really capable of what this so-called man has done.
Country on the planet, 48 times larger than Germany. It encompasses 11 time zones. It straddles Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. It craves a prominent place on the world stage. And with last week's
the scarlet beast
Putin appears to have
that sits upon many waters,
and perhaps much more. What did America get from this meeting, though? At the press conference after the summit, Donald Trump gave perhaps the most embarrassing performance by an American president I have witnessed or read about. His preposterous
or even imagined
to talk his way out of his troubles make him seem even more absurd.
The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative.
But what has been obscured by this disastrous and humiliating performance is the other strain in Trump's Russia narrative. Donald Trump has always said that having better relations with Russia would be a good thing.
Wouldn't it be a great thing if we could actually get along with Russia?
Wouldn't that be a good thing? In this, he's not alone. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton both embraced the idea of a reset in relations with...
But you're not even going to mention the fact that he said that while quoting a bunch of Russian propaganda?
George W. Bush.
Russia that it was just a convenient fucking excuse?
The enemy of the United States.
But every reset and rapprochement failed. It's time to recognize that Russia is not seeking to integrate itself into the American-built system of international order. It seeks to undermine that order. As Putin seeks to destabilize the West, he seems to understand the vulnerabilities of free societies, their internal divisions and discord.
Trump knew that shit going in.
He understands the fragility of institutions like the European Union and NATO, and ideas like integration and diversity. In other words, Vladimir Putin understands us very well. The question is, does Donald Trump really understand him?
What kind of a naive little fucking schoolgirl are you? Seriously. That just blows my mind. These are the professionals, folks. These are the experts. They either don't have a clue or they're not willing to give you one. But anyways, it seems as though we're just going to let ourselves get cast around by one breeze after the other. Just went black for no reason. What I was saying is that what we're not doing is anything that resembles executing a plan that could possibly save Western civilization. There is no backbone. Oh, there's... Fucking stream is red again. So, keep trying to speak and the fucking stream keeps going red. Actually just cut off completely. It's like, you know, fuck it. I have my ass a cookie. So anyway. What we're not doing right now is executing a plan that has any real hope of saving Western civilization. That is because there is no plan to unify our countries in general, our societies in general. Because the only thing that's given credence anymore is that which allows people to escape the sense of God. What I'm saying is that atheism is the only thing our culture is spreading right now. And that is essentially a lack of culture. But more importantly, and more than, you know, in a more real context, more than culture, more than cultural identity, can lend one, say, strength on the battlefield. It's belief, it's religion, it's spiritual purpose that first and foremost gives Americans their superior level of courage, that's given Westerners this level of courage, that's been needed for their survival for centuries and centuries. The fact that we can sit there and pretend we're making a documentary about Putin without talking about the plans that Putin inherited from his forebears and the plans that he continued and proceeded with. We can't bring any sense of relevance to everyday people. We can't actually make them see the danger that they're in. Because this is all just, you know, a social studies class. This is an intellectual exercise, the way it's presented. It has virtually nothing to do with us other than election hacking. People need to realize they're hacking our daily fucking lives. And one of the reasons why most Americans feel comfortable staying out of politics is that they leave it to people who are interested. They need to realize that the people who are being interested, who are interested in politics, who they would normally rely on to stabilize the system, are being targeted in very serious ways. Many are being harassed to the point where they either die of overdoses or commit suicide. That's a fact. That's reality that's going on right now. It has been going on for a couple of years. Trump derangement syndrome. What the fuck is this bullshit?
The summit pushed Trump critics
By the way, I knew it was going to be this bitch. I just knew it. I always know it when it's going to be this bitch. It's always something that seems interesting, but it's completely useless. And generally speaking, if you want to know what trains of thought to resist, put on this bitch.
Disdain for the president's behavior,
Slobbering servility, supine puppy.
such disdain has triggered a counterattack.
Trump derangement syndrome has officially come to the Senate.
Well, actually, it's been everywhere else.
Full-blown Trump derangement syndrome?
Trump derangement syndrome has become a thing. And now, I've never heard of Trump derangement syndrome. I'm not a doctor, but
You don't need a degree in psychiatry to make the diagnosis.
Trump derangement syndrome. Hatred of Donald Trump so intense that it impairs people's judgment.
The president himself is citing TDS. On The View, Judge Jeanine Pirro pointed at Whoopi saying she had it.
Did you just point at me?
Yes!
Listen, I don't have Trump derangement. You know what's horrible?
What's horrible?
When the president of the United States whips up
cities.
people.
It took a commercial break to calm her down.
I very rarely lose my cool, but I also don't like being accused of being hysterical.
TDS is nothing new. 15 years ago, someone coined the term Bush derangement syndrome, which was followed by Obama derangement syndrome. And now,
She's got a little bit of that Trump derangement syndrome, hoping that one of these comedians will come up with a anti-anxiety medication for these liberals. And just take one tablet a day, maybe a suppository, and take it easy.
But who needs a suppository?
You wouldn't be calling me a liberal if I was kicking the shit out of all three, you fucking morons.
To get you, you may be suffering from Trump.
Had enough of this bullshit. Okay. Would you say that the founding fathers had King George derangement syndrome? Would you say that they were committing irrational actions? Well, then you should probably shut the fuck up about Trump derangement syndrome. Because what's irrational is people who are within reach of this motherfucker not solving the problem. What's irrational is a generation of fucking pussies that are unwilling to defend their very freedoms. If it wasn't for rational anger, if it wasn't for righteous indignation, there would be no such thing as America. That's one of our strengths as a nation. And that's why it is the foreign-backed propaganda agents that seem to have a problem with it. Because they want you to be good little Orwellian pawns. They want you to have approved think and approved think only. And, oh, you must have a derangement syndrome if you believe in the fucking Constitution and the rule of law and don't think a criminal should be running this country. Oh, but Hillary! Oh, but Hillary! Let me tell you something, you dumb fucks. Hillary Clinton was being interrogated by Russian agents that work within our government. Oh. The entire thing about her fucking server and anyone who participated in antagonizing it was working on behalf of the Russian Federation. They were basically gathering as much information as they could through our fucking House of Representatives. That's why Chaffetz and Gowdy are just so fucking shady. And that's why the Russians made so much of their online presence happen. The fact of the matter is, the server that she was using was more secure than the server that she was supposed to be using. It was more powerful, it was faster, and it, unlike the server that she was supposed to be using, did not get directly accessed by hackers. The one she was supposed to be using did. probably something to do with the fact that it had twice as much fucking processing power and 4 times the memory. What do I know? I was only an IT guy my entire life. I fucking build servers. Fuck's sake. Well, I used to. Now I build fish tanks. They're harder to hack. So anyways. The entire "oh, but Hillary" line, the entire anger at Hillary line, makes conservatives, supposedly, makes Trumpists, makes Putin's little minions as much of a fucking naive schoolgirl as Sanjay Gupta was just then. Yep. You're all a bunch of little fucking snowflakes. You see, what Sanjay Gupta made personal between Hillary Clinton and Vladimir Putin was not at all fucking personal. Sure as hell wasn't personal to Putin. It wasn't fucking personal to Hillary Clinton either. And what any non-compromised, fully aware, fully competent, rational reporter would have said was that Hillary Clinton was made a scapegoat for America's interests. You see, you can't say that without sounding like a Hillary Clinton supporter, but the fact of the matter is Hillary Clinton represented in every way the best interest of the United States of America. And every single little fucking thing that so-called conservatives can "oh, but Hillary" about is a lie put there in their minds by the collusive effort that has been ongoing for over a decade between the Russians and the Republicans. You see, Democrats stopped really getting along with Russians a long fucking time ago when they started learning about history. That's all it took for us. But Republicans, they won't read your fucking history books. So you better find out a way to remind them of what the Bible says. And that the land of Nod is in the beginning and the end in the form of Gog and Magog. Russia and the Mongolian horde. Magog. MAGA. Alright, let's see here. Who dis?
Late last night,
Meadow.
Another 1,452 documents, files, and other items were handed over to prosecutors in the Southern District of New York. These are not Special Counsel Robert Mueller's prosecutors. These are federal prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. These 1,400 some odd items were handed over to prosecutors by the special master who is reviewing evidence in the criminal investigation of Michael Cohen, the president's longtime personal attorney and a longtime executive at the president's business, the Trump Organization. Now, these 1,400 plus documents are items that Michael Cohen's lawyers and or President Trump's lawyers had actually singled out and said these documents were privileged and they should not be given to prosecutors. Late last night, the special master who's dealing with the evidence in that case disagreed. She rejected that claim that these items were privileged and instead said, nope, these items are not privileged. They are going to prosecutors despite your objections. Now, no criminal charges have been brought against Cohen, but he is the subject of an active criminal investigation, which gave rise to the search warrants, which were used to obtain all of these millions of documents from his home, his office, and his safety deposit box, even from a hotel room in which he was living. And we've had weeks and weeks now of back and forth in court over whether federal prosecutors would actually get to see this stuff that was seized, whether they'd get to see and use these documents and files taken from Cohen under those search warrants. Cohen has been arguing that some of these documents can't go to prosecutors because he's an attorney, and that some of the documents that were seized by the government represent confidential communications between him and his clients. And therefore they should not be handed over to prosecutors. Prosecutors should never see them. We've had weeks of wrangling over whether this stuff is privileged. You might remember at the very start of this, right after Cohen was raided, his legal team started off in court claiming that millions of the documents that were seized would turn out to be privileged. They'd turn out to be covered by attorney-client privilege, and so prosecutors wouldn't be allowed to see them. That's what they said right off the bat in court. It has not worked out that way at all. Almost everything that was seized from Michael Cohen has been reviewed by this special master who's overseeing the evidence in this case. And upon her review, ultimately, almost nothing has been found to be covered by attorney-client privilege. As a consequence of that, almost everything seized from Michael Cohen has been handed over to prosecutors, who, as we speak, are using that evidence and anything else they've turned up in their investigation to decide whether or not they are going to bring federal criminal charges against Michael Cohen. Now, that said, you are about to hear some new reporting right here, right now, that says that one very, very newsworthy item that was seized from Michael Cohen as part of this process, it actually is one of the few items in this case that was marked privileged, that was considered to be an attorney-client privileged communication that prosecutors could not get. Again, in the grand scheme of things, almost nothing was labeled by the special master as, okay, yeah, that's privileged, prosecutors can't get it. But this item that you have heard so much about today actually was labeled privileged. This is the tape that you have heard so much about today, in which Michael Cohen is said to have recorded himself talking in person with Donald Trump in September 2016, 2 months before the election. They're talking reportedly about a $150,000 payment that was made to a woman named Karen McDougal. Karen McDougal says she didn't have a one-off sexual encounter with Donald Trump, nor is this one of his sexual harassment or sexual abuse allegations. Ms. McDougal rather says she actually had a long, consensual affair with Donald Trump shortly after he married the woman who is now First Lady, Melania Trump. Now, the president's friends at the supermarket tabloid, the National Enquirer, they paid Karen McDougal $150,000 in August 2016, so a month before this taped conversation we learned about today. And that payment from the National Enquirer to Karen McDougal in August 2016, that appears to have been sort of a hush money variation, kind of a riff on the hush money theme. It was a payment that quite clearly that publication made to benefit then presidential candidate Donald Trump. But the question is exactly how. They paid Karen McDougal for exclusive rights to the story of her alleged long affair with candidate Trump. They then didn't publish that story. Right? So bottom line, it's hush money. She gets paid and the story goes away. Then a few weeks later, Trump gets elected president. Ta-da! But there's open questions as to the nature of that payment and potential criminal liability that may attend to that payment. And now the New York Times has broken the story today that a tape exists of Michael Cohen and the president talking about that payment. And there's one part of this story that is really important in understanding why we've all learned about this today and what it might mean and who might conceivably be in trouble because of it. Deep into their story today, the Times noted this, quote, Mr. Cohen's lawyers discovered the recording as part of their review of the materials seized from Cohen's home and office. And Cohen's lawyers then shared it with Mr. Trump's lawyers. The Times cites 3 people briefed on the matter in order to make that claim. So there's this open criminal investigation into the president's lawyer, Michael Cohen. As part of that investigation, the FBI seizes tons of stuff from him. Among the things that were seized was this recording that Cohen apparently made of himself talking with candidate Trump about this payment. Over this weeks-long, now months-long back and forth process that we've all been able to watch, where this court has been reviewing all the stuff that was seized from Cohen to figure out which of it should be considered attorney-client privilege. Cohen's attorneys apparently came across this recording as one of the items seized. They reviewed it. They shared it with Donald Trump's attorneys. If this new reporting that we've got tonight from Emily Jane Fox at Vanity Fair is true, that this tape was marked privileged, that means a very specific thing. That means prosecutors would never have gotten it. So that means the only people who would have had access to this thing are Michael Cohen's lawyers and President Trump's lawyers. And Michael Cohen's lawyers apparently didn't leak this thing to the New York Times today, which means, by process of elimination, that President Trump's lawyers did. So there's been all this sort of breathless reporting today. Oh, look what they got on Trump. Oh, this looks so bad for Trump. You know what? Don't get your chain yanked on this one. What appears to have happened here is that President Trump's lawyers found out this tape existed. For obvious reasons, they apparently realized it might be a potentially pretty ugly thing for the president to have exposed or have brought up in court as a surprise. And so today, the president's lawyers themselves appear to have leaked the existence of this tape to get out ahead of this story. And so yeah, the story appears to be real. Today is the day in American history where we get this headline about the FBI seizing a tape of the president discussing a secret payment to a Playboy model right before the election, right? But you should know that the reason we got those headlines today is because the president's legal team decided that you should see this story today. They did it themselves. And you can think of a few rational reasons why they might have done that. I mean, number one, I have no idea if this was in their mind, but this does put something else on the front page for once, after 5 straight days of, hey, is the president actively working as an agent of the Russian government? And treason week, right? The subordination of the president to the Russian government has been the story of the week, which has not gotten better over the course of this week. Today, it did get supplanted a little bit by reports about this lurid tape. And yeah, these reports today are about a new Trump scandal too, but at least it's a different scandal than whether or not he's controlled by Russia. So that's one effect.
Oh, the bar we've set.
Today. Also, by releasing this story themselves today, the president's lawyers, I think, hoped to shape the narrative about this tape, and thereby lessen its impact if it had arrived later on as a surprise. One of the president's lawyers, Rudy Giuliani, literally tried to sell reporters today that the whole point of this tape was, quote, in the big scheme of things, well, it's pretty powerful exculpatory evidence. Actually, it's the president on tape talking about paying off a Playboy model who he says he previously definitely didn't have an affair with and he had no idea she was paid. I mean, this is a lot of things. It's not exculpatory. But I think the president's lawyers are assuming that if they could release this information on their own time and put their own kind of spin on it, however ridiculous, maybe somebody will be dumb enough to believe that. So I think they're trying to get out ahead of the story so it's their story, no one else's. Here's another dynamic at work here, though, which makes this new reporting that we've got from Emily Jane Fox really important. The special master who has been reviewing the evidence in the Michael Cohen criminal investigation, she has processed millions of documents already, right? She's handed, as I said, almost all of them over to the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York. Those prosecutors have been weighing that evidence, while they decide whether or not they're going to bring criminal charges against Michael Cohen. That process has been going on for a long time. It will not go on indefinitely. It will come to a close. And then, if prosecutors are going to bring charges, Mr. Cohen and his lawyers will have to start talking to those prosecutors about the kinds of charges Cohen might face, and the prospect that he might try to get a break from the government, might try to get some lenience from the government in exchange for his cooperation. And cooperation in this instance doesn't mean that he agrees to be nice. Cooperation in this instance means he agrees that he'll give them some information. Information that would be of greater value to those prosecutors than whatever value they might see in putting him in jail. Now, if they've got the goods on you and you're facing serious charges, you've got to have something really good to give them in order to persuade those prosecutors to accept that information you're giving them in exchange for not nailing you to the wall. Right? The worse trouble you're in, the better story you've got to be able to give prosecutors about something else that really matters to them. Well, if one of the things that Michael Cohen had was a recording of the president 2 months before the election discussing a secret payment to a Playboy model to avoid the disclosure of his alleged extramarital affair with her right before the election, after he had publicly denied both the affair and any knowledge of any such payment to her, that might conceivably be seen by prosecutors as a valuable thing that Michael Cohen could provide to them, that he could testify about, he could talk to them about. Remember, if this recording was in fact marked privilege, that means prosecutors didn't have it. Michael Cohen had it. Michael Cohen was in a position to potentially make that available to them. But instead, the president's lawyers leaked the existence of this tape and made it public anyway. And in doing so, Trump's lawyers have essentially taken this away as something that Michael Cohen might have otherwise been exclusively able to offer prosecutors for their pursuit of any other charges and any other people that they might be interested in. Michael Cohen would need to be able to give prosecutors something really valuable that only he could give them in order to get a really good deal from prosecutors. Right? This presumably reduces Michael Cohen's chances of getting any sort of great deal, at least to the extent that it hinged on this piece of evidence that he could give them about the president. Now, obviously, the president, right before the election, talking about a secret payout to a Playboy model, right? It's definitely of lurid interest. It's potentially of political importance. Would it be of interest legally to prosecutors? We don't know for sure, and we probably won't know until we see if this thing comes up in court or in an indictment. But there's a number of ways in which this reported discussion of a payment to Karen McDougal might conceivably end up being legally consequential for the president. And this is just, right, this is in the abstract, given what we know of the described conversation. I mean, starting with the least serious, this may impact the president's financial disclosure forms. The president's lawyer today, Rudy Giuliani, suggested that this conversation on the tape was about whether or not Trump should reimburse the National Enquirer for that payment that the publication made to Karen McDougal. If so, that might indicate that that $150,000 payment was made to her on Donald Trump's behalf, and he'd always intended on paying it back. In that case, it was a loan to him. Any such loan should have been disclosed on his financial disclosure forms. So there's that. Moving up the ladder in terms of seriousness, the payment could also potentially put the president on the hook legally in terms of campaign finance violations. If that payment was made to influence the outcome of the election by protecting Trump from the embarrassment of the disclosure of this affair right before voters went to the polls, that payment would in effect be a campaign donation. And not processing that kind of donation properly, accepting a donation that large in contravention of federal election laws, right? That's the sort of thing that most of the time, honestly, just gets you a slap on the wrist and a fine. But if it was a knowing, willful violation, that could be a criminal matter for the president. Kind of thing for which a person could go to jail. Stick a pin in that for a moment. We will come back to that. I mean, further up the chain in terms of more serious consequences, depending on the exact nature of that payment and the so-called contract that Karen McDougal entered into with the National Enquirer on the president's behalf, there's also the possibility that fraud could be a relevant consideration here. If that contract was fraudulently drawn up, so it was not really what it said it was for, criminal fraud could potentially be implicated here. As a close cousin to that, there's also the possibility that there could be money laundering concerns here. If the source of the funds was disguised or the ultimate recipient of the funds was disguised, so it looks like somebody else's money is moving through these channels, going somewhere else other than where it's actually going, that could potentially be money laundering. Now, if any of those potential charges were going to be pursued here around this hush money payment, for a number of them, particularly that campaign finance possibility, prosecutors would also likely need testimony or some other kind of evidence that would show the mindset of the people involved in this alleged crime when these violations were committed. If and when this tape turns up at a criminal trial, you might expect that Michael Cohen would end up on the stand testifying as to the authenticity of this tape and the context of this discussion. If there are criminal liabilities associated with this conversation, you might expect that Mr. Cohen and the other person in this conversation might both end up being called to testify as to what this conversation was about, what they understood it to be about, what they meant, whether they acted on what was described in the conversation. Michael Cohen was one of the two parties in this conversation. The president was the other person. I mean, learning about the existence of this tape was good for 1,001 headlines today, right? The American people actually hearing this tape will presumably result in an even larger impact if and when that happens. But imagine how the White House must feel tonight about the prospect of President Trump having to testify in court or before a grand jury as to that payment, the meaning of this conversation, whether or not it implicates him in criminal behavior. Because of the privilege issues here, because of who had access to this thing, it really looks like it's the president's own legal team that put this out today in order to try to get ahead of this story. And maybe in so doing, they have reduced the chances that Michael Cohen will flip and turn state's evidence against the president. But the prospect that the president will end up in legal wrangling about these types of payments and cover-ups, it's got to be an uncomfortable prospect for this White House. I mean, this isn't the Russia scandal, right, at all, but for all the reporting that we've seen, that the White House in some ways is more scared about the Michael Cohen case than they are about the Russia case. I mean, this is why, right? We now know there's at least one tape of Trump and Cohen talking about stuff the president has publicly denied. And apparently the president didn't know that tape recording existed until it turned up in what was seized by the FBI. And that brings us to just one last point. The only way this is not a great source of agita tonight in the White House, right, is if the president is pretty sure that he won't ever get questioned about this stuff. If the president has some reason to believe that, you know what, push comes to shove, we'll litigate this to the end, but in the end, I know I'm not going to be bothered or touched in any way by this, by any civil inquiry, by any criminal inquiry on this or any other matter while I'm president.
There you go.
If the president is pretty well assured of that being the final word on whether or not this stuff is going to get to him as president, that would be a great load off the White House's mind at a time like this. Well, there is a magic wand that the president is trying to wave in order to get that for his presidency.
Very good.
That magic wand is named Brett Kavanaugh. He's the president's Supreme Court nominee. Well, Mr. Trump's choice for the court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, has expressed strong support for executive power, hostility to administrative agencies, support for gun rights and religious freedom. These are all conventional positions among conservative lawyers and judges. But there is one stance that sets Judge Kavanaugh apart, and it could not be more timely. His deep skepticism of the wisdom of forcing a sitting president to answer questions in criminal cases. Quote, "It is not at all far-fetched to think that the question of whether President Trump must respond to a subpoena could come before the Supreme Court shortly after the confirmation process for the next justice," says Walter Dellinger, former acting Solicitor General of the United States. Quote, "I do not know of any judge who has staked out as strong a position on presidential immunity, even from questioning, as Judge Kavanaugh has." And I know this is different parts of the universe crashing into each other, right? But this is where these things overlap, right? The Russia scandal, the Michael Cohen mishigas, the pending Supreme Court nomination. I mean, Sally Yates was on our air last night saying, you know what? The White House absolutely was aware that Flynn was the subject of an open investigation when the president went to the FBI director and pressured the FBI to end that investigation. Can the president be questioned about whether or not that was obstruction of justice? I mean, Sally Yates said last night he was certainly trying to influence that open FBI investigation. Was that actually criminal obstruction? When does the president get asked about that? On the Michael Cohen case, if on this tape the president is heard planning to reimburse this publication that paid off his alleged mistress, because they wanted to keep her story out of the press before the election. Was that a criminal campaign finance violation of the kind that could actually put a guy in jail? Could that hush money payment, which the president apparently lied about and said he didn't know about, could it further criminally implicate him in terms of fraud or money laundering or anything more serious? I mean, completely separate and apart from whether or not he and his campaign were involved in the Russia attack, the other big story this week, right? These other things are absolutely live, active criminal inquiries at this moment. And here's the president's nominee for this Supreme Court in this environment. Here he is in his own words, quote, "We should not burden a sitting president with civil suits, criminal investigations, or criminal prosecutions. I believe that the president should be excused from some of the burdens of ordinary citizenship while serving in office. Congress should enact a law, quote, providing that any personal civil suits against presidents be deferred while the president is in office. Quote, Congress should consider doing the same with respect to criminal investigations and prosecutions of the president. A president while in office should be, quote, exempt from criminal prosecution and investigation, including being exempt from questioning by criminal prosecutors or defense counsel. Quote, even the lesser burdens of a criminal investigation, including preparing for questioning by criminal investigators, those things are time-consuming and distracting."
So, he would like for criminals to be presidents, basically.
Like civil suits, criminal investigations take the president's focus away from his or her responsibilities to the people. Moreover, the indictment and trial of a sitting president would cripple the federal government. Such an outcome would ill-serve the public interest. How'd you pick that guy?
I wonder.
The Russia investigation, with the obstruction of justice investigation related to the Russia investigation, with the Michael Cohen investigation, with the president's lawyers now learning the hard way that in the Michael Cohen investigation, Lordy, there are tapes of the president. How do you think President Trump alighted on Brett Kavanaugh, of all people, to be his nominee to the Supreme Court? Emily Jane Fox from Vanity Fair joins us next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from...
Oh boy, Vanity Fair. A classic U.S. news institution. So, back down in one of Putin's favorite stomping grounds, the former Republic of Yugoslavia, NATO has been assisting the mostly Albanian state of Montenegro. Now, my general rule is, once a century has passed, it's not much point quibbing over where some people fucking came from. And it's been a few centuries since the Albanians came to that area as janissaries of the Islamic horde. Now, what's happened recently is NATO has come to the assistance of the Montenegrin government due to the rise of right-wing Serbian extremists. Serbians being the previous occupiers of that land, but not the original inhabitants. The Kingdom of Serbia is very ancient, but was established after the fall of Rome, and dates, on record in the 600 to 800 year range, but actually goes around 1200 if you count the, I guess you would call them more city-states that had existed previously. The lineage of those families that were largely blended and accepting of recovered prisoners, recovered slaves, that kind of thing. Very nice place. Very lovely place. Very peaceful place, but always prepared. Active military participation was a tradition in that land, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And for hundreds of years, in fact, they defended Europe in a way that Ukraine does now. But now, Yugoslavia is divided up into Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, and Bosnia. And this little place on the shore called Montenegro is a much older settlement than any of the other places where Serbians feel like their national pride is violated. But anyways, this place used to be a very international model city-state where Muslims, Christians, and Jews all for the most part got along. Until the Muslim faith became the Islamic faith, or the Islamic horde, really. Much like when the Catholic Church became the Inquisition. Only more externally conquest-oriented. As opposed to internally genocidal. Or eugenicist at the very least. Anyways, so what's been going on recently is the Russians, much like their backing of right-wing Serbian nationalist groups in Yugoslavia, have backed these right-wing nationalist groups in Montenegro, and are doing so to basically establish a Russified Serbian. It's very key. Not like a proper Serbian nationalist used to be. Okay, there's a whole different strain of Serbian nationalists that is Russified and fascist-like, very much like the Trumpists of today. And they're trying to install those people in power in Montenegro so that Russia can have direct access to the Adriatic, which is the center of the Mediterranean. So anyway, Trump is complaining about Montenegro's participation in NATO, even though it really is a missed opportunity to make Montenegro an intercultural capital. And basically, through his shunning, whether successful or not, only increases the likelihood of continued Albanian dominance in Montenegro, as opposed to a fair representative, intercultural democracy. He's helping set people against each other. And he's also using it as an excuse to further cause chaos with the aim of dismantling NATO. Because, he works for Russia. He works for Putin. It's really just that fucking simple. But anyways, so who's here? What should the next topic be? This whole lack of viewership is kind of tedious. This would be much more productive and interesting and, legally viable as a social media platform or as a technology platform. If people were allowed to come in here and, ask questions or give actual opinions or anything. But it seems as though since I don't let Russian trolls rule my mind, all I get is the few people who found me a long time ago mixed with the people who've been directly linked to the channel and these fucking annoying hacker trolls. That's funny. We're asking if truth can survive this president. fascinating question to be having to ask. I hope the little Russian pawns are truly satisfied when they see this channel and they realize the rights that Americans have are simply the rights that we think Russians should have. But instead of loving us for thinking that you should have those rights, you've actually been convinced by the people who hate you and have taken your rights from you to hate us and to take our rights from us. Brilliant, I must say. What a bunch of fucking geniuses you are. It's not pseudoscience debunked, dearie. That's just a fancy way of phrasing religious persecution. And when you see somebody claiming to be Jewish that doesn't know any better than to emulate Nazis while pointing the finger, you really must wonder why they, unlike MSNBC, have never, ever, 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 ever had a proper centrist preacher condemning Republicans on their show. That's what we need more of. Proper centrists, Christians, people quoting the Bible at conservatives. CNN hasn't been doing it, but MSNBC has. Chris Cuomo does it. Fancy that. He was raised Catholic. Aren't they supposed to be the whore of Babylon? Oh yeah, because you know how many fucking waters that Rome sits on. At the time, the Bible was compiled by King James. Transgender Elizabeth. King James, yes, King James. Those are jokes about the paintings. Go look at the paintings and you'll laugh at the jokes. It's the same head with just like different Mr. Potato Head decorations on it. So there's one King James and one is Sir Francis Bacon and one is Queen Elizabeth I. Yeah. Anyways, the time that was all compiled, the nation of many waters was a known terminology. It was a known place it was Russian. Because they had ports everywhere at that time. And they were the only ones who did. In the Baltic Sea, in the North Sea, in the Adriatic Sea, in the Black Sea, and on the coast of the Mediterranean at the port of Tartus. Russians have been involved in these places for centuries. They inherited this involvement from the dominance given to Muscovia by the Horde. And of course, it's quite easy to understand when we go to, guess what? The maps. In fact, the same old fucking map. How about that? Just the same old damn map. Now see, the Bulgars represent the enslaved tribes. And many consider those as having been returned to Europe to drive it apart. And it is for this reason that the Austro-Hungarians, later to become the Yugoslavians and Germans, didn't really want it to affect their entire land. And some of the first racial atrocities committed among nations were between the sons of Benjamin in Germany and their genetic siblings that had been taken away and returned and been deemed impure and allowed to settle in the southeast of Hungary. Back into ancient Poland, where it had been tradition for generations to send such people. And there they, along with the families of retired mercenaries and soldiers and officers, were considered to be the defensive strength of Europe. really took for the Europeans to turn against each other was propaganda. Stories told of atrocities committed by the rulers of foreign lands. And then, of course, there was the false prophet who came through there and instigated a false crusade, and the group of warlords, I guess you'd call them, that fled Byzantium and had established churches there, never really showed up on the battlefield after having essentially provoked the whole fucking crusade. And that actually leads us to this time period on this map, in which those pseudo-kingdoms were annihilated, and the dominant kingdom, the ancient city-state that had been, I don't know, their caretaker for all those years, was surrounded. It just seems so tactically incorrect for the Horde to have pushed to Vienna. And remain encamped there. For how long was it? 250 years. All the while not conquering Moscow? See what I mean by that? I mean, the Crusades happened. The Mongolian horde basically became Islamic. The Golden Horde started advancing. Met with the Janissaries in Eastern Europe. Had Vienna surrounded. And did not advance for 2 more centuries. For that matter, they had Kiev surrounded for a good long time. And allowed, really allowed Moscow to come in and save the day. Howdy, Mr. Conway. I assumed you were occupied and just listening. That's fine. We had a little visit from our friend there. Oh no, you're just joining us? Well, somebody's been here. Who the hell's been here this whole time? The count just went up to 2. Off work but hungover. Ah, you're a good, fine Irishman. It's probably why so many Irish live in New Orleans. In fact, there's a fascinating echo of ancient past that runs through New Orleans that I think makes it one of the most fascinating cities on the planet. So we have 2 major parade events down there in New Orleans. One you've heard about, one you probably haven't. These aren't the only parade events we have. There's many, but these are definitely the 2 biggest. There's Mardi Gras, which is a celebration of ancient Greek demigods and gods and goddesses, and myths and legends, and this Catholic predominant city has been doing it for a very, very long time. And the other interesting thing that kind of ties it together in a weird way, but not just on the surface, but when you actually look at the esoteric history of it, which I'm sure you'll be fascinated in, with the Lombardy connection. Irish-Italian. The fucking Irish-Italian parade, the Irish-Italian Society, is a big thing in New Orleans. People just think it's a French city. The largest population, other than Cajun, other than Creole, is Irish-Italian. And I really think, man, let's have a little fun with intellectual hypothesizing for a second. Let me see if I can get up. Well, this is a good map to have, but right, I have Italian blood in me too. I have Irish and Italian on my mom's side, and then I have the Irish blood on my dad's side. Scotch-Irish, as they call it in the Morris family. Which just means Celtic before all the bullshit happened. What do you think of that? It seems to me that there are some distinctly Saxonite and rather suspicious Scots. Where there are many, many Scots who look a lot more Scottish and less like Cossacks you'd be hard-pressed to tell from Irish people until they spoke. And, of course, if you're American, you'd probably still be hard-pressed to tell from Irish people. And this is particularly observable when you consider the what was it? The refugees from Palestine that were actually welcomed into Ireland 2,000 years ago. And which I'm sure is part of the dark black hair that I have in my family. Before that, Ireland was full of fucking strawberry blondes, man. Just people who were hard to look at without squinting in the fucking top of the day. Like, seriously. And that's that gene stock that you find in Scotland as well. Oh, right. No greater concentration on Earth. That's, the last bastion of the, the bloodline before the war. I've been talking to Hathor recently, my ex-wife, Jem. And she, in her current genetic state, looks visibly like the progenitor of those people. She is the redhead's redhead. And I think I might even get her to have a live stream with us. Because I've been trying to bring her up to speed on things. Because we're friends now. And we've forgiven each other for, stupid shit we've done to each other in the stupid world that we live in now. But the fact was, it made a lot of sense to her when I told her that in 2011 I set her free. And I can't even tell y'all how happy I am for her. And that worked for her. Just like as a friend, as a really old friend. You know, and sometimes a friendship is born in battle or heartbreak, but I really do respect her. And she has a beautiful family now. And I am telling you, the person she used to be did not want children. Oh no. She did not value children in any way. In fact, she referred to children as a parasitic organism. Something that attaches itself inside of you, consumes your nutrients to sustain itself. Yeah, not a big fan of children. Now she's one of them moms that posted pictures of her baby every day. And that's fucking adorable. We'd even discussed that before Katrina, the storm, not my child, there is a slight difference, especially when all this is considered. Katrina, little demigoddess that she is, she's relevant to the whole gem story as well, but Katrina the Storm, I didn't ask her to go into details. I took her at her word. I know her like she knows me, that we're just going to convey facts to each other. We've had enough of a history of communication and misunderstanding and overcoming and forgiving each other and shit upon shit, okay? Just in this one lifetime. That I don't have any misgivings. If she fucking reports something to me, I fucking believe her. She felt like she caused Hurricane Katrina. I'm like, that's funny, because I felt like I caused Hurricane Katrina. And then I just had to make the joke. Because we don't agree very often, her and I. No. I had to make the joke. Well, the moral of the story is, when you and I agree, watch the fuck out. But anyway, I think it'd be very interesting to have her, my dad, Kira, myself, And if we could ever find where Terry is to bail his ass out, or whatever needs to be done, figure out what the fuck happened to him. Get us all together on a little discussion about things. I tell you what, she is someone so far removed from being a brainwashed Christian or any sort of Christian at all. Totally adored by atheists and Wiccans and Satanists and, you know, the Grand Poobah, whatever. I mean, anyone demonic just flocks to this girl. But in her wise years of ancient spirit, she managed to herself come to see it as a burden. That's beside the point. The point is, you wouldn't expect for a person like this to take the things that I say at face value. But just as I trust her to testify of her experience, she trusts me based on my experience. Requiring some proof, but never confusing me with someone to give false testament to an account or fabricating evidence in any way. And being able to line up the stories about the changes I've made to reality itself with the experiences in her own life, considering that before 2011 she did want to destroy the world. And that ancient Leviathan at that point was not annihilated, was not defeated in combat. Let me get the camera up on here. Yes, I'm in a fucking bathrobe. I'm in my house. I'm allowed to be. So, as I've said before, when teaching people how to get control of their own minds and recognize what subconscious echo influence is, what a demon is, how it needs to be dealt with, how they try to sap your motivation, how they try to distract you from truth and focus on the greater good and try to get you to narrow down your life to just a series of feeder bars that you can hit for your own pleasure. Simply discussing these things with someone can cause them to have PTSD-like flashbacks, can cause them to have overwhelming surges of emotion. Just at the point where they begin to stop rejecting it with rhetoric and repeating pre-programmed responses, when they start to actually consider demons are real and they've been influencing you your entire life and they're trying to destroy our very society. They are organized against us. And that you as a child of God have the power to rid your mind and others of them. Something happens to people. That demon really starts to become very obvious. Oh, to me, oh yeah, but to them, because their behavior starts getting out of their own control. And at a certain point, and I let them know this ahead of time, that before we go any further, if this becomes too much for you, I want you to take my hand and ask me to stop it. And I want you to believe that God has given me the power to do so. And at that point, on the over a dozen times, I don't want to make it look like it's been hundreds of times, but probably in the 2 to 3 dozen range, I've had this happen with friends and lovers. And I snap my fingers. And that demon goes bye-bye. Now, based upon the rules of testing, based upon, nobody gets a free pass in life, they can always be plagued again by it. And there is really no way to continue to progress and become stronger and more able to help other people than by facing that demon head on. But at least for that time being, I was allowed to give them a respite. And the methodology, while similar, it only really applies in the abstract. What I do in those instances really isn't anything compared to what I wound up doing that day. But on the day that I was filming, after a couple of nights of what the fucking about Gabriel and several other weird spiritual, presumably demonic encounters, complete with visible aberrations. Like, reality was fucking falling apart, okay? Kira had just moved in with me to escape the situation she was in. And I had noticed and began to film a video about the sun not being where the fuck it was supposed to be in the horizon. You see, on David Drive and Airline Highway, you can look that direction up, there's a little cross street called Laurel, where there's some projects, and that's where I was living. And my view in this little privately owned fourplex across the street from the projects is easy to discern on the map, and the street is a direct 45-degree angle between north and east. It's quite clear the way I show the directions in the video. And as I was filming the video, I began to sense some things that I wasn't really comfortable talking about to anyone. And I felt compelled to do something that I wasn't sure if I wanted to even acknowledge I was doing on camera. Because to think that I should be able to do something like that at that point, before I had fully awakened, to think that I should be the one with that task, kind of blasphemous. You know, it's a bit on the arrogant side, to say the least. Only human. I began to apply direct spirit pressure. To the term I had for it at the time was the idolater's throne. And in that reality, that's an apt description. It was a throne of wrath and awe that was placed there by generations of brainwashing through manifestorial actualization. And this goddess of wrath, who was created in simul union with Gabriel and is tied with him for being the third being in creation, had at that point been used by her son in a way. But at the same time had used him to ascend to that throne. And what I'm speaking of is lust and deception. And Jem in her former state would have no qualms about telling you she was a practitioner of sex magic, to say the least. Well, it was this army of deception that had propagated the worship of lust. I mean, we're talking about the heyday of Kim Kardashian booty. And it seems my closing argument as an exorcist that day that I did not make on camera convinced that goddess that her cause was self-defeating. I'm not getting emotional. There's something in my fucking eye. That's not her, it's the other eye. Yeah, this eye. This eye, I think a fucking gnat just flew in my eyelash. I don't even know we had gnats right now. I thought we got rid of the fucking gnats. It's been gnat for weeks. Which is weird because it's summertime now. I guess the fucking gnats are outside where they belong. Just want to get lost in here or something? I don't know. Had a fucking spider just come down from the ceiling earlier. Maybe that's what it was. Spider in my eyelash. Good timing. Kitten's in there tearing up something on the kitchen floor. Anyways. So, where the fuck was I? Oh, there I am. Shit. I break off of staring at my stupid head to collect my thoughts.